So hello and greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, the home of the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. My name is Abra Bush, and I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Institute Studies at Peabody. I'm delighted that you could join us today for Reimagining the Music Library in a Time of Crisis, the first in our series of 9 summer lunch and learn events focused on the challenges and opportunities of remote instruction for music. A special thanks goes to the academic leadership at many of the conservatories and schools of music in the United States and the United Kingdom for their support for this series. They have graciously recommended presenters who do excellent work in the area of remote and online pedagogy. As I speak to you today, I am in my home along Baltimore's Inner Harbor, a half a mile from City Hall, where the protests here are primarily located. I want to acknowledge that we come to you today on Blackout Tuesday, a day to disconnect from work and reconnect with our community through an urgent step of action to provoke accountability and change. We at Peabody join others across Johns Hopkins University and the music industry in adding our voice to a call for justice, fairness, and equality in light of the death of George Floyd and too many others who have come before him. We decided to move forward with this session today to acknowledge that we are a strong community of performing artists, teachers, and scholars who can be catalyzed for change agency. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our website within a few days for anyone who is taking time to process what is going on in this country, hold space for students, friends, families, and communities to reflect on the gravity of the significance of this time, start conversations which can galvanize real change, and serve as true allies to those who are tired, hurting, and deeply upset. Before we get started, I would like to thank 4 Peabody staff members who are joining us today and supporting this event. Joseph Montcalmo is Peabody's Director of Academic Technology and Instructional Design, where he leads an incredible team of staff involved in every aspect of academic technology and online learning. Joe is here to advise on any matters related to pedagogy, synchronous and asynchronous instruction, and any other technological applications. Adam Scalici from Peabody's production team will be in the background monitoring the webinar and working through any technical challenges we may have. Please send comments directly to Adam about tech issues. Patrick Wallen from the Dean's Office will provide any additional support. And finally, Christina Mansior from Peabody's Launchpad is here to help me curate your questions. A very special thank you to all of them. 2 other quick notes before we begin. Please hop into the chat and introduce yourselves. We would love to hear from you and hope that you'll consider this an interactive session. The presenters will spend a total of 20 to 30 minutes on their presentations, after which we will reserve the remainder of the time for questions and comments from you. Please place your questions into the Q&A area of the webinar so that we can easily find them. And now, without further ado, I am very pleased to welcome our guest presenters for today. Their bios are all available on the website, but in the meantime, please join me in welcoming Kathleen DeLaurenti, Head Librarian of the Arthur Friedheim Music Library at the Peabody Institute, Michelle Oswell, Library Director at the Curtis Institute of Music, and Greg Sigman, Assistant Director of Research and Instructional Services at the New School Libraries and Subject Liaison for the Performing Arts. Kathleen, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Abra. I'm gonna just get my screen share going here. Thank you for indulging me. I'm usually a PC user working on a Mac from home right now. We really appreciate everyone joining us today. As Abra mentioned, our presentation is a little bit on the short side. We're going to be going through some of the solutions we've come up with at our libraries right now, but we're really hoping for some interesting and engaging discussion later this afternoon. In the middle of March, many of us who work in libraries found ourselves in what seems like an impossible situation. We were given very short notice and asked to move our entire operations, which are largely based in person, into a remote environment. We went from circulating, in our case, 16,000 to 18,000 scores every year to our student body of about 700 to 750 students, to having to figure out how to translate all of this into a remote environment. In my course in particular, I had students on 3 continents once everybody was settled and relocated after our campus closed. But I think that it's important to focus on the possible in these situations, and I'm really excited to share some of the ways in which we address the challenges that we were faced with today. We're going to focus in our presentation today on collections. I want to just take a minute and acknowledge that the work that myself and my colleagues are doing goes well beyond the work that we're doing in our collection access in our campuses. We're happy to talk about those things in our discussion this morning, but our presentation is really going to focus on what did we do to continue access for our learners and our researchers to the collections that we all hold. We had a little bit of help with this early on, especially because of the situation and this being a global pandemic. There were quite a few publishers who stepped up to help. And Michelle in particular is going to talk a little bit this morning about how that's going to translate into some services at her library. But we had quite a few publishers who worked with electronic textbook providers to give free online continuing access for students who perhaps didn't purchase a digital copy, had their physical copies left on campus and weren't able to access them. And this is something that I think has been incredibly helpful during this time. As we start talking about reopening and what campus might look like on the fall, one of the challenges we're going to have to face is what happens when some of that gratis access starts to go away. Another thing that we've had that's been incredibly helpful is the National Emergency Library from the Internet Archive. So for those who haven't used this collection, they've had an ongoing a collection with millions of titles that you're allowed to check out as ebooks. During the national emergency in the United States, what they've done is they've removed any wait lists for access to those titles. So now you no longer have to wait to get a popular foundational musicology text that you may not have other access to because 10 other graduate music theory seminars need that same text. So this is something that they've made accessible to us as long as the United States is experiencing a state of emergency. The HathiTrust collection, which came out of the early days of Google Books, is something that many of our libraries and institutions are members of. They've worked with all of us who are members to expand that access to what we usually only have accessible in print if they have a digital corollary available. So for many of us, that's been able to extend access to many of our score collections in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do. Unfortunately, this isn't something that any library can tap into. If you're not an existing HathiTrust member, then it's something that wouldn't be available to your users. So while it's a wonderful privilege for us to have access to it as members through Hopkins, I want to make sure that we're aware that this isn't something that every institution can take advantage of. And hopefully that's something that we can think through this challenge about how to mitigate in the future. Another thing we've had to do is think about leveraging e-reserves for ongoing student access. My staff digitized within a week and a half 350 hours of content and another 80 hours of processing just to make sure that all of those items that are on our shelves for physical access in the library were going to continue to be accessible for our students for their success and their continued learning. And I would say that another thing that this has really kind of put into stark relief is that as libraries have been thinking about our service models, the kinds of programming we provide, the ways that we're involved instructionally in the classroom, that this emergency has really forced us to kind of get back to basics in a way. And it has created some situations where we've been able to continue to provide those basic services, but it's taken a significantly bigger investment of time, financial resources in some cases, and certainly staff resources, I think, to continue to explore all of the myriad ways that we can sort of patch together access to our collections during this emergency. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Oswell, who's going to talk about her experiences at Curtis and some of the specific solutions they've come up with there.
Sure, thanks, Kathleen. You can go to the next slide. Right, Curtis Library, we've been responsible for purchasing textbooks for our students for this and the school since at least 1994. That's as far back as I can be sure that we've been paying for it out of our budget. And historically, our assistant librarian is responsible for coordinating the requesting and ordering of those textbooks, and the librarian manages the invoicing. Right now, we pay for all of the students' textbooks. Those students do pay a comprehensive fee from which some of the money is earmarked for textbooks. Books are distributed by our faculty during classes, either on the first day. Sometimes, though, they'll do that over the course of the semester if there are several books being read throughout the course. In our most recent iteration, we've partnered with independent bookstores to arrange that ordering and delivery of print textbooks. We haven't used e-textbooks at all prior to March and the COVID-19 crisis. You can go to the next slide. So what were our immediate problems? Like many schools, we found ourselves closing at a time when a lot of students were off campus for spring break. And at the beginning of March, not all of our textbooks had yet been distributed. Those that were left in dorm rooms or in apartments by students who found themselves unable to return to campus. And our poor faculty, who were already under extreme pressure to transition quickly to an unfamiliar online environment. Just a little background, we were piloting Canvas this past semester. We hadn't had a working LMS for a while. Now they all had the challenge of teaching students who also didn't have access to the textbooks that we'd already purchased for them. So we started looking into temporary solutions, some of which Kathleen hinted at a little bit earlier there. And we found that one of the benefits of having a library managed bookstore textbook ordering system, even though there are many problems, one of those benefits is actually that we're pretty good at finding solutions, finding resources for people that you wouldn't otherwise know where to find them. And if you remember correctly, there were just on our listservs, there were tons of resources and workarounds being shared between professionals. It was really an amazing time to see everything that was being shared around. And we focused on a few different things to help our students gain access to non-public domain materials in a couple different ways. We did use the National Emergency Library. That helped us provide access to some of our liberal arts titles, especially such as novels and plays. Did have a slight problem in one of the classes where students didn't end up having the same edition checked out. So a teacher would say, read pages 35 to 50, and they all read different text somehow. But on the whole, it worked okay. And then we also focused on these two distributors, e-textbook distributors, Red Shelf and Vital Source, who in March opened up access to a large amount of paid content, but only for semester-based schools, mostly to the end of May, because they were doing it based on semester. The publisher lists include a lot of the textbook biggies. You've got Pearson, Cengage, Norton, and the like. The way to look at this is they didn't really lose too much money by doing this. You figure most of those students had already paid for their textbooks at the time, so it wasn't such a big deal to all of a sudden make everything free, but it was a distinct advantage for all those students who had left their textbooks back on campus. I have an acquaintance who works at a quarter-based school, and they were not as fortunate in this case. So it's just something to think about. They did not open up these resources to quarter-based schools because they hadn't bought their textbooks yet. The next quarter hadn't begun. So they would have been losing money by opening up. But these resources did end up working pretty well. If you want to move to the next slide, we can go ahead. As we got settled with online teaching and moved into late April, our library staff started to think about what we were going to do in the fall. Curtis has already decided to start online in the fall. So we were looking at ways to provide online access to all our course materials, which is incredibly new for us. As I said, we'd never done e-textbooks before. So we took a look at our previous year's textbook orders and compared them to the lists of availability at Red Shelf and Vital Source, and ended up finding that Red Shelf carried access to about 40% of the titles that we were likely to order. And by using them, we could also hedge our bets against any further COVID-related moves to online teaching that, God forbid, might happen in the future. So we're gonna go forward with Red Shelf in the fall. Some of the advantages are shown here. They do have one reader interface regardless of the publisher. For those of you who are more familiar with e-textbooks and e-books, you know that there are all sorts of different platforms, and they all look different, and that's a little bit frustrating when you're trying to teach a class. So one e-reader interface. There's perpetual access for students available via that Red Shelf interface. You can purchase different levels of access from anywhere, I think, to 60 days up to perpetual access. As I said before, the publishers are already available, and Red Shelf Inclusive Access is access integrated in your courseware. We're using Canvas, using the Canvas API, which monitors your add drops for each course that's using a Red Shelf textbook. There are simplified billing options. Since we, Curtis, pay for the textbooks, they're able to invoice the school instead of students individually, although that is also an option. There's no charge for faculty and TAs in the integrated access, which is nice. And if you're into that sort of thing, there's usage data available. And you can click to the next. So I tested our integration for Red Shelf in our Canvas test instance. I found it incredibly easy to set up. I was really surprised, actually. I don't know why. Canvas is very easy to use. The library, or the bookstore, if you're not Curtis, sends Red Shelf a course and textbook list so they can connect data on their end to the school's LMS. And then once you do a few steps in the background on the admin side to set up the API call, any faculty member who has a fairly basic knowledge of Canvas or whatever LMS you're using can add that textbook module, which is where the yellow arrow is on that slide. You can click through. So once the user clicks on Red Shelf eBooks, you'll see a page listing the course materials for each one of their courses. You can click through again. I don't know why this is a test course, so I don't know why they chose sport finance, but there you are. And if you look at that, there you can see that there are different levels there. That one's a lifetime access book that we've paid for. The DRM restrictions are relatively limited. You've got offline access available at 100%, and you can even print some materials. If you click through, there's a second book in that course, and that one's a little more limited. We must have paid for 180 days of access on that one. No offline access, and you can't print, but it is available online. And then if you click through again, here's inside a book. This is their little reader. They've done some work on creating educational tools, so you can put in notes and highlights. You can do flashcards. There's some collaboration. I'm also pretty sure they put a lot of time into accessibility. I haven't investigated it fully yet because we haven't needed it, but it is available. So that's just a quick overview of where we're going to be going with textbooks for the fall. Red Shelf isn't going to solve all our problems. We're definitely going to be looking into open resources and more digitization of our own library materials, but we're excited to give this a try going forward as part of our plan for classroom support. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Michelle. My name's Greg Sigman. I have a really long title, but a very great deal of what I do is the music librarian for the Mannes School of Music in New York and the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music. Next slide, please. Thanks. And this is, you know, what we all miss doing. A student comes into the library. This, in fact, is a soprano who wanted a vocal score for an opera. She came to the library, she found it, she checked it out. We were able to hand it to her and she walked away with it. Wasn't that fun? And don't we wish we could do that now? Most of us have spent decades and millions of dollars building our print collections of music and books. And now we're suddenly deprived of the benefits of those collections. So how do we cope with that? How do we deal with not having direct access or easy access to these resources? Next slide. So of course, electronic solutions are great. Michelle talked a bit about those. And we have, and at the New School, we're a very space-challenged institution. Funnily enough, square footage in Manhattan is pricey. So we've emphasized electronic purchases for years. We subscribe to lots of databases. Almost 641 are music specific. That includes the Alexander Street Press, Classical Scores Library, Library of Music Source. But hey, guess what? Not everything is on the internet. Contrary to some popular belief. This includes even brand new publications, tons of scores. You can't get most of the best editions of standard repertoire. Very difficult to purchase in electronic format, or if they are available electronically, they're really only available to individuals, and there's not really an institutional purchasing model or subscription model that's friendly to libraries. And yes, I'm looking at you, Henley. So how do we cope with that in the music world? And I'll be speaking for the new school in general, because this is applicable not only to music resources, but what we've been doing generally for all of our students. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're very space challenged in Manhattan, and every library I know in New York City makes use of offsite storage facilities. We're no exception. In fact, we have more materials now in offsite storage than we have on-site. Now we contract with a private company to handle this, and hey, that warehouse is still up and running and operating. We've worked with them to, we've negotiated with them where they will scan selections from items that we have in offsite storage, and we can send those scans to patrons. They will also mail physical items to a patron. Of course, this isn't free, and we pay a per piece rate for those. The library absorbs that. We do not charge the patrons. This is a nice picture of that's the actual warehouse in Paterson, New York, where it is. And one of those people up on the cherry picker is me. We got to go and tour it, and it was kind of a fun time. Next slide. Okay, so how do we implement this on the ground? We already had in our discovery layer, which is Primo, a mechanism for patrons to request materials from offsite to be delivered to pick up in person at the library. To have it mailed, we added to the request form a spot for mailing address. So you put your address in and they mail it to you, which is pretty cool, right? Now, some of you have probably already, it's probably already occurred to you what a big downside for this arrangement is. What sorts of materials do we send to the offsite facility? The ones that we use every day and that everybody wants? No, we sent the ones that people didn't want every day. The least frequently used scores and books are the ones that got sent out to the offsite facility. So the most frequently used items we kept on site. Next slide. Okay, so here's another thing we've started doing. We will buy, if this is the only way we can get it to you, we will buy a new item and have it shipped directly to the end user. The workflow for this, I've kind of collaged here in the slide. First, we try and locate an electronic item that can be acquired, delivered to the patron right away. If that's unsuccessful, a librarian will reach out to the patron. There'll be some back and forth communication. Oh, hey, is this really what you need? Is there some other way we can meet this, your research need or your performance need? And do you need it right now? Can't wait. All the whole dance. And we go back and forth. If the patron does need it, we'll buy it. And right now we're only shipping to patrons that are located in the United States. Like a lot of other conservatories, we have a large contingent of non-domestic students. We are not at this time shipping to them, but say they will purchase the item, have it shipped directly to them. It's already checked out when they receive it. To get back to the workflow, if I confirm with the patron that they want the item in the very near future, we purchase it for them. I submit a ticket, a request to our tech services department. They do the actual ordering. They put a record into the ILS. The item arrives at the patron's home, already checked out to them, right now with a due date of September the 8th. And hopefully we'll sort everything out in the fall when they get back. There is no processing that's done at the vendors, so these items arrive to the patron, unlabeled, and we're trusting them basically to bring them back to us. Although they're on the hook. The item is checked out. Okay, we've been doing this now for a few weeks. We've had pretty good success with it. We've done, I think at this point, about 50 purchases this way. We do not have unlimited funding for this, but we're trying to continue it as long as we can. We're applying for a grant, in fact, to keep it up. Okay, thanks very much. Oh, final slide. Yay, this is a little painting that's on the front window of a service station that's down the street here, 31st Avenue in Queens. And also a good message.
Thank you, Greg. So what I wanted to share with you, although my mouse is now acting up with me, is a little bit about what we're doing beyond just the collections that we already had on site, and what we're doing to think about how to continue to build collections during this time and to continue supporting some of the unique access to materials that our music students need. So one of the things that we've done at Peabody is that there has been a program that's been started called Artreach. And one of the goals of Artreach is to continue to share music making for a variety of different reasons with our community. So we're sharing things like laptop concerts and living room concerts and porch concerts that our students and faculty are producing and sharing online. And we're also sharing specific recordings and performances throughout our hospitals that are being streamed through CCTV at the Johns Hopkins Hospital System. So one of the things we did in the library was we decided that we wanted to capture it. So thinking about what is this future history going to look like, and how do we make sure that these living room performances live on beyond just the length of an Instagram story. So we've started a Peabody Artreach archive that is a companion piece, and we're currently soliciting, as we see them, deposits from our student, staff, faculty, and alumni community, and also inviting students to just deposit or nominate content that they create themselves. So this has been a really exciting way that we've been able to do this. What's really made this possible was this year at Friedheim Library, we stood up the Aviary streaming platform for our users. And this has given us a whole new avenue for producing, storing, and providing access to streaming video and audio, which is unique. It has a lot of accessibility features. And unlike tools like YouTube or Vimeo or Panopto, which is really made to stay within, I think, largely the confines of the classroom, we have a lot of permission levels that we can use to tailor this to a lot of different audiences, so that I've been able to share content directly from a composer with one student in one course that was not publicly available, all the way up to producing something like an archive like this. The other thing that we're working on is collaborating with the preparatory here at Peabody, and I know many of our conservatory counterparts have similar community music schools and programs, to provide access to our preparatory students who also found themselves in a remote situation. So this is Eric Rasmussen's class, and he's uploaded a lot of his courses for babies and toddlers and young children. We've put those videos together and we've put them in our content management system. We provide him with links that are only available to people that he wants to share them with, that expire at a certain period of time. And we've been able to get this content out. When I checked last week, we had over 800 hits to the content that we've been putting up with the preparatory students. And this also includes a lot of accompaniment. So our accompanists have been providing piano accompaniment to our studio learners so that they can continue to practice with a pianist from their homes or no matter where they are at no cost, no additional cost to them for an app subscription or something like that. We're also in conversations with our voice department about expanding that so that students can have that continued ability to get that custom accompaniment with the coaches that they're working on that reinforce the performance practice and stylistic choices that each of our singers is making with the repertoire that they're learning in their lessons. So these are some of the, I think, more, I don't want to say more exciting things. I tend to say that. Some of you on this call who know me know that I'm always looking a little bit about the exciting things that are coming out tomorrow. But what I think was important about our conversation today was also grounding it in just the basic services that we're providing every day that are essential in some of the interesting challenges that we've had and making sure that we continue that. And I want to thank my colleagues, Greg and Michelle, for sharing some of their experiences there. And I think with that, we are ready to turn this over to some questions and discussion from the group. So we're really interested to hear what you might have to say.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen, Michelle, and Greg. Very useful and informative information that you've provided so far. There are a number of questions in the chat and in the Q&A around matters of copyright and how you are all dealing with that right now, photocopying, other sorts of conversations around copyright. So I will turn it over to you to start to address that. And then in addition to that, the question has also come up around sheet music and instrumental music libraries and copyright issues around those.
I can speak to our circulating collection and our archival collections. I know that one of the things that we're relying heavily on now are the principles in the best practices for academic libraries, the Code for Fair Use, and I can get that link and put that in the chat here for folks. But the very first principle in that talks about providing course materials to our students. So our council has really taken to adopting that, and anything that is required materials for our students and our classes right now, they're supporting digitization and making that available to our students for their research and course use. So that's something that we've been relying on, and I know that those decisions are going to probably be different campus to campus, and I would certainly recommend talking with your council or your library leadership about what those conversations have looked like. Christina or Abra, is there anything more specific about the ensemble questions that was in there? I didn't see.
So does that fair use extend to instrumental ensemble collections or to sheet music? Are you aware of anything there?
So one of the things, we did a presentation at American University with the law school there on Friday about music and open education resources. And one of the things we really encouraged everyone to think about is that even though there are some complicating factors around copyright and music that are a little bit different, that copyright protects the same things with music, and music is eligible for the same exceptions as everything else. And then another document that I would call to everyone's attention is the digital audio transmission for course reserves best practices statement. The Music Library Association put that out in 2006, I think, the first draft. It was revised in 2009. And that's been advocating digitization of full works for music students for online course delivery for that entire period. To my knowledge, there's not been any legal challenges to that document. But it really outlines a lot of the rationale and thinking that we need to be examining when we want to use music materials online and need to take advantage of some of these copyright exemptions, because it allows us to really think through what are the pedagogical purposes for this? Why is this required? Why do my students need access to a full Beethoven symphony and not just half of a movement if we're going to be discussing the Beethoven 7 as part of the 250th anniversary. So being able to really think about what pedagogical goals that we're trying to achieve through this only helps strengthen our fair use. And also thinking about where we're delivering this to who and under what circumstances. So thinking about, like the example I gave, I did have a faculty member came to me and had a student who wanted to research an opera that has never had a video production released. And so I approached the composer that I had a relationship with and said, do you have archival footage that I might be able to provide to just the student? I have a system where I can do that, where no one else will access it. They won't be able to download it. They just need to be able to view it as part of their research process. And because we had that system in place, the composer was able to provide me with an archival document that the student could access. So I think that thinking through who's accessing that is also important. We didn't make that accessible to everybody in that same course. It was just delivered to that individual student and to the faculty member who needed to assess her work.
Thank you, Kathleen, very much. A number of questions in the chat and in the Q&A have revolved around institutions which maybe aren't as well funded, and some of the budgetary considerations when you're using electronic resources or purchasing those, what have you. What resources out there would you recommend, or how can folks access some of these resources in inexpensive ways?
I know it's going to depend on your institution, but if your acquisitions department tends to purchase from J.W. Pepper, they have had a service available, and I'm just looking at their website now, and it's going to be available through June 30th, with materials that you've purchased from them in the last 4 years for which there is a digital score. You can share that. With people in your community. I think in theory it was originally designed for small ensembles, but I did contact them and they're opening that up to that. It's open to libraries as well. So if you purchased one copy of a score in the last 4 years and from J.W. Pepper, and there is an electronic copy available, you can share that with one patron. If you buy 2 copies, then the same thing. So that's a way of something you've already purchased, not having to buy something new.
Great. Any other resources out there that you would recommend? Can you say a little bit more, any of you, about the Alexander Street Press? That was something that I was not aware of until very recently, and I think it's a pretty extraordinary catalog of work.
Sure. We've used the Alexander Street Press Classical Scores Library for some time, and it is, I believe, it's chopped up into 4 volumes, and they do that via annual subscription, or you can pay a one-time purchase price, and that would be, the cost would be negotiated with them, and usually it's based on your institution's FTE. They're pretty good collections. They're PDF scans of usually older editions of standard repertoire and other work. The most recent volume, I think, the volume 4, has a lot of more contemporary stuff, works by living composers, and so on. And yeah, it's a good resource to have access to in these times.
I would also suggest Babel scores as something that your institution may want to look at, especially if you're interested in contemporary digital score collections that focus on composers from more diverse backgrounds. One of the things that I really appreciate about their service as well is the way that they've been responsive to libraries. So initially they didn't permit downloads of the works, and they've changed that and made some downloading available so that students can annotate scores in the applications of their choice and retain those annotations, which I think is really valuable. It's also incredibly inexpensive. So it's something that I think can help you diversify your collections really quickly, but it's also something that's a lot more attainable to many more of our institutions that may be facing some budget challenges.
Thank you. Greg, a couple of questions here for you around your off-site storage. Where is your offsite storage? And also, if folks at the offsite storage can mail items to patrons, why can't the library staff go into the library and do the same right now?
Right. So our offsite storage, as I mentioned, we contract with a private company for that. Clancy is the name of the company. The warehouse is in Paterson, New York. It is still staffed. And now, why can't we just go into our stacks and scan stuff or mail stuff as well? Well, the administration at the New School has made the decision to shut the campus down completely. We do not have access physically to the buildings. I can't send a librarian in if I wanted to at this time, and that may change at some point.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
The next question I have here is around challenges for students who are in Asia, primarily in China or behind firewalls. Have students had trouble gaining access to any of the digital collections that you have mentioned? And if so, how have you overcome those challenges?
I can see that so far I haven't heard of specific issues. I do know that it comes up from time to time, and usually those reports go in through the Sheridan Libraries, which is the largest library on the JHU system. But what we do have in place at our institution is a VPN service. We try to make things so that they don't require the VPN to access them, so that it's just through a single sign-on with your university ID, or I know Michelle uses Easy Proxy at her library. But sometimes if that doesn't work, then the VPN allows them to, make their computer think that it's back on campus. So that's one way to get past some of those access issues for our subscription services. And it can also, I'll let Joe speak to this, but it can also help with some of those additional electronic resources that you may want your students to engage with that may be more particularly impacted by censorship.
Okay, thank you. Have any of you resorted to embedding direct links to digital scores from IMSLP into your MARC or MARC records in order to make it easier for patrons to access the resources? And is this legal?
I'm not going to speak to the legality, but no, we haven't. I will if someone asks me a reference question, I will look on IMSLP first, and I will send links where I can, but I don't have the staff to embed, to do lots of stuff like that with MARC records right
now. Michelle, do they offer a set of MARC records for IMSLP?
Not that I know of. I think we'd have to be doing, I don't think so. I'd have to be doing it individually. So.
It would be really, I think it would be really beneficial in some way. I had conversations, some folks may be aware of the Open Music Library project that Alexander Street Press / ProQuest was managing for a while, but has been sunset as of the end of May. But, I think that it's important for us to take advantage of those resources. I think that it's a failing of our discovery services that we haven't been able to figure out how to make this accessible at one point of search for our students. But I would say for anybody who may want to try to bundle up that metadata as some sort of knowledge base that we could plug into our ILSs, that's completely legal, and there would be no copyright issues with that. So I would invite someone with the resources and interest to do that, because I think many of us would be very excited to take advantage of something like that.
Great, thank you. For new compositions, some composers offer scores, but not all publishers do. Any tips for accessing these kinds of compositions, since they may not even get published and then be bought by libraries?
Yes, and that's I think, the important thing is just don't hesitate to actually contact a composer. There's not going to be any silver bullet or one-size-fits-all solution to say, oh yeah, do this, and then you can get all access to all these composer scores. But if it's a living composer, reach out. They're probably willing to work with you right now.
I would also see that I share Greg's experience. One of the research projects that I've been hoping to get off the ground that we were unsuccessful in a funding attempt with last year is to start working to create some documentation of some licenses for composers to set terms to sell directly to libraries in a way that I think isn't clear right now. And most of the composers I talk to, the commissioning organizations I talk with, are very interested in doing that. But they're not necessarily clear on how to do it or how to think through it. And it's a question that I'm getting more often from students. So it's something that I'm hoping that we can get together, a sort of template of what a license can look like, and start sharing that with the composition communities that we work with. Because I think that right now, one of the things that's unfortunately happening is our composers are missing out on libraries as an important market. Many of us are very committed to collecting contemporary works, and especially to collecting works from underrepresented voices in our collections. And without the abilities for us to purchase their content, I think that that's a real barrier. And sometimes they're not even aware that there's a barrier there. With the ways that they're thinking through their own self-marketing projects. So anybody who might be interested in that, I would welcome you to certainly contact me after this call.
Thank you. Here's another publishing question. Holly in the Q&A asked, I've noticed some publishers increasingly are offering view-only and branded images of scores on their websites or through a reader like Issuu, I-S-S-U-U. Although I can't think of a quick single way to identify this body of work at large. What are your experiences with these?
Zinfonia might be a good place to go to get a large quantity of them. I tend to just go to the publishers' websites because the big conglomerates like Wise Music or Boozy directly, because I find their websites easier than Zinfonia, but I think that would be a good place.
Yeah, and I think that that's just an attempt by the publishers to make their perusal scores a little bit more accessible. It sometimes can be frustrating for our users because they can't download them or they can't print them and they are watermarked. But in some cases, that is going to be the only access you're going to be able to get.
Thank you. There has been a question in the Q&A about the accompaniment options, Kathleen, that you mentioned through Aviary, and dealing with sound latency and quality issues. So I would ask Kathleen and maybe Joe if you can field that one for us.
So the program that we have is we're inviting the accompanists to record themselves and then provide us with the audio files. The benefit to that is that we can share those directly to specific studios from the library with individual students. But we're also building this little collection that can be reused for courses in the future. And again, it allows us to do more diverse repertoire than Accompanist or some of the other apps. Virtually Vocal, I know, is another common one out there, although we are looking at a subscription with that. So that's been really nice. The latency issue doesn't happen in that particular situation because the students are able to then stream that where they are and play that back through their own computer or their own device locally. So their instructor is getting both them and the accompanist through the same connection. So it's not the latency issues that we're seeing with live performance. So that would be another benefit there. And it allows them to continue to have at least a little bit of that personal relationship with their coach or accompanist in a way that they just can't with some of the latency issues that we're dealing with trying to collaborate at the same time during Zoom or with some of these other tools. And I'll let Joe talk a little bit more about those challenges.
Sure, thanks, Kathleen. I would just reiterate, we've had a lot of conversations at Peabody, and I know I've been involved in some conversations with many of the music schools. I know Yale has organized a series of conversations where the Holy Grail has been held up of this remote synchronous performance that would include accompaniment. And the reality is that everyone is coming to is that it's just not possible right now. That if you're on the same campus with a high-speed network, you can certainly do some direct connections to keep people separate and test that, and we're in the middle of testing that right now at Peabody. But when we're all in our own apartments or cities or countries around the world, the limitations of just the internet speed from each of our locations is a limitation that we're not going to be able to get around in the short term. There are lots of projects out there that are trying, and we're hoping that the technology will evolve quickly now that the demand is there with all this remote learning and teaching going on. What Kathleen was talking about is really what we've tried to focus on is not so much depending on that synchronous live performance to work by the fall, but rather focusing on some innovative ways that we can do some alternate types of teaching. So, the recorded accompaniment, while it's not ideal, does allow for really good sound quality for the performer. Recording it on that end and then sharing with a professor via YouTube will give you much better quality than trying to do a live performance over Zoom, for instance. There are definitely some advantages to doing those live interactions over Zoom, but we've also seen a lot of faculty having their students upload, like I said, as a recording, and then using the Zoom sessions as a time to have a one-on-one conversation and watch the recordings together, and do a little bit different kind of a pedagogical approach that might serve the students well going into more scenarios like this in the future. So that's what we've seen so far. I think the main takeaway is trying not to depend on things that may not exist yet and may not exist by the fall. And instead of depending on those, using this as an opportunity to try and innovate a little bit.
Thank you. As faculty begin to think about their classes for next semester, with the understanding that some of us may be in person, some of us may be remote, we may have to pivot at any point based on what happens with the virus. And even as we think about the use of libraries in the future, what have been your greatest challenges in supporting material requests from faculty and students over the last 12 weeks or so? And what should faculty consider as they think about building their courses for next year?
Lack of students is a problem. Lack of student workers to help. I don't enjoy sitting and scanning all day. But I mean, it's necessary. So staffing is a problem. So I'd say the biggest thing I can think of is time. Give us as much leeway, as much time as possible to prepare. We're going to be asking our faculty to put in textbook requests and reserve requests by the end of June, so that we can take as much time as we can with this minimal staffing that we have to get things done.
I second that, Michelle, for sure. I've already reached out to our techniques of music faculty, in fact, because I know they have a lot of items on reserve that are not available electronically out of the gate. So we need to figure out in advance how to get that covered, and if they need to shift to any different materials, then I need to make sure they're okay with that, or that we're able to meet their needs. But yeah, time's the most important ingredient. Get on it.
I didn't say this in my presentation, but the whole red shelf thing is really only the first step, because it's only about maybe 40% at most of what our requests are likely to be. So it's going to be a negotiation process. We'll start with red shelf. From there, if it's not there, then we'll see if there's a regular ebook available. And if not that, then we start negotiating, okay, is there a different type of material, a different source that you can use, or do we need to scan or digitize in some other way? So that time and communication is really, really important.
I would just add that there's been some discussion in the chat about costs and access. And one other thing that you can look at that Michelle touched on a little bit is thinking about what kinds of existing open education resources you might be able to adopt. So in our Introduction to Psychology course at Peabody, we've had our first OER adoption, and the faculty member there is using a free and open textbook. Student can purchase a $40 copy if they prefer, but it's available in any format. It comes with the same sorts of support materials, question banks, slides, other things that commercial textbook providers are providing folks with. And I would encourage faculty to start thinking as early as possible about how you want to explore these options, because your library and folks like Joe's team, if you have an academic instructional design team, can help with that a lot. And we can help you think through how to be combining open resources and copyrighted resources to really create the course text of your dreams. But again, it does come down a little bit to time. And I think one of the things to just keep in mind too, with some of our budgets and accessibility that someone pointed out in the chat, is that our ebook costs are not one-to-one for print. So, if there's an ebook out there that Oxford is selling for $79 for us to get unlimited access for your students, we're probably paying between $200 to $300 for that same book. So this is going to challenge, I think, some of our resource budgets a little bit too, as we try to do as much as we can. But I think this is why more libraries are looking at what the Internet Archives program does, and if there's something that we might want to be able to replicate as libraries and as consortia. So, you know, if you're part of a consortium, I think that these conversations are going to start bubbling up, because I think that one of the lessons we've learned is that, as Michelle said, and as my team knows, trying to scan that whole shelf of reserves is a real challenge. And if we're going to do that, you know, maybe we need to be thinking about what is the long-term accessibility of our print collections, and how might we be able to do this in a way that makes a lot more sense for our users and expands what that access can look like.
Thank you all very much for that. I have one final question for each of you, and that is, how are you building community right now, virtual communities, or connecting with students and faculty during this time where we're also remote? And again, we only have a couple minutes, but I'd love to hear from you about some of the wins that you've had in this area.
Well, in some ways, using Zoom and video conferencing software has enabled me to kind of crash more faculty meetings than I used to be able to, right? So I'm seeing a lot more faculty than I ever have, people who never would have visited me in the library. I get to see them on a screen. We have a ton of adjunct faculty at the new school. And a lot of them don't come to campus anyway, but you can meet them virtually. For students, that's something I've missed. I've had a lot less direct interaction with students, which is a downside.
I decided to trial Encoda. I was not sure I was going to bring them up today, but I decided to do a trial of Encoda, which is an app for copyrighted digital sheet music. And I found that everyone seems much more willing to communicate with me by email than they used to. They're reading their email, is what it seems like, at least for me. And so I've actually had really good communication with students who normally it would be like pulling teeth to get their opinions about a trial database. But they've all been emailing me and giving me really good feedback. So that's been a win, just an old-fashioned email.
We've been focusing a lot on our social media, and I posted a link in the chat. Our students and outreach librarian are putting together a summer reading club that's going to happen on social media, that's going to include all openly accessible texts, so things that anybody who wants to participate in will be able to access from anywhere in the world. So that's one of the, I think, more exciting ways that we're working to create some community for our users.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much. We've basically run out of time. Before we sign off, I again want to thank Kathleen DeLaurenti, Michelle Oswell, and Greg Sigman. Your presentations have really been insightful and fantastic for all of us as we think through not only resources that are available, but also how we think about preparing for fall. I also want to thank Joseph Moncalmo, Adam Scalici, Patrick Wallen, and Christina Mancior for your support today. And finally, as a reminder, these sessions will occur live every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time through the end of July. A full list of sessions and the upcoming presenters, as well as previous sessions, will be available on the Peabody Keep Teaching website. We hope you'll consider tuning in again.